Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Nolan Pillay, and I'm your host for today on Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan. Now, we all have so amazing journeys, and there's so much more that we need to learn from each other. And that is why it's such an honor today to welcome Mr. Marshall to our show. And a little about Mr. Marshall, he's a polymathic intellectual who has devoted over 50,000 hours to the study and practice of multiple dimensions of human potential and development. He received a classical education as an honor student at Jesuit Military Prep School, was accepted into engineering school while still a junior in prep school. That's amazing. And attended college on academic scholarship. He graduated college with a Bachelor of Science cum laude. While still an undergraduate, he began the study of alternate arts and sciences, which today would be described as transformational and holistic. Eventually, he became a professional practitioner, and after 28 years of formal education, had a long career as a human development engineer. Jim has integrated the best aspects of the most advanced techniques on the planet and expanded their limits by his own research and discovery. He has successfully treated and/or trained hundreds of clients over a 40-year career, and is the inventor of Septemics, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, and several consciousness expanding systems. His areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, music, organization, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, and education, and the list goes on and on and on. So, Jim, it's such an honor and a privilege to have you on our show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nolan.
It's our pleasure. So let's get straight into it, because I normally would ask you to share more about yourself, but tell us, what do you think our listeners should know more about you?
Well, the first thing they need to know is that I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I constructed a revolutionary practical system and published it in the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales which span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any situation which arises in the life of any person can be successfully analyzed by one or more of these scales. 24 of the scales apply primarily to individuals, and 11 apply primarily to groups.
Wow. So Septemics, if we just dig deeper, I just saw one of the comments or one of the reviews on your book, and it says, for anyone who would like to understand themselves completely. And this is so related to Septemics as well. So Septemics, maybe just for the people that don't really understand the technical bit, for the listeners, if you have to break it down in a nutshell, what is Septemics?
Well, first of all, let me say, Septemics is based on completely natural phenomena, meaning these scales were discovered empirically. They are as real as the 3 laws of motion, or the periodic table of elements, or the Pythagorean theorem. I discovered this, and I just, by my research, developed it, and then said, wow, this can help people. I can go from helping people by the hundreds, which I had been doing as a human development engineer, to helping people by the millions by giving them this book. So when I discovered the phenomena, I said, this has to be a book. Yeah. And the first version of it was completed in December of '95. And I gave it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees, and they all loved it. So then I knew I had something big here. And I devoted the next 25 years of my life to perfecting this system. And I know I succeeded because I have seen 27 years of response to this book. This material is not inscrutable, it's not obscure, it's not incomprehensible. Any normal person who can read English reasonably well can dramatically improve his life by using the material in this book. I wrote this book to help people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons or groups up these scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself enlightening and beneficial. Finally, once you know the actual level of a person on any scale, you can improve that person by moving him up one level at a time. All of these advantages represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior, and combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're basically saying, so if I had to read the book, I would be able to understand at what scale I am as well. That's how simplified it is as well.
Well, let me say this. Every human being is at some level on all 35 scales. Mm-hmm. The data is just sitting there waiting for you to access it.
Got it.
When you find your level on any scale, you have an epiphany. You will have realizations. Now, if this goes to such an extreme that a person will read this and without even attempting to do so, he'll say, "Ah, no wonder my mother acts like this. She's at this level. This describes her perfectly." You see, that's what happens when you read this book. This book is extremely user-friendly. I designed these scales to wrap around the reader. So when you read these scales, it's like putting on your eyeglasses and looking in a mirror. You see yourself better than you did before. You see yourself with clarity. You also see others with clarity. For example, I know, absolutely know, the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents previous to that who I studied, such as Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. Okay? It's not ambiguous. What is more important than knowing someone's basic purpose? Now, of course, everyone has thousands of purposes, but underneath the many, there is a basic purpose. Every human being has one of 7 basic purposes. And by narrowing it down to 7, it makes it fairly easy to find which one it is on all scales. You see, if I were to stop some guy in the street, who I don't know, and say, "Tell me, what's your wife's motivation toward you?" He would look at me like I was from Mars. He'd say, "What are you talking about? How can I possibly know that? There are thousands of motivations." And I'd say, "But you see, if you look at the scale, there are only 7 basic motivations. All the others are subsets of these." And if he looked at the scale, he would see, I see, she's actually at level 4. He would understand her basic motivation toward him. And that would clarify their relationship. Mm-hmm. So all of this clarifies your understanding of people. You see, I was a natural-born engineer. And of course, when I went into engineering school, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things like most other engineers. In other words, electrons, airfoils, motors, things like that. Yeah. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, I realized I wanted to engineer not anything physical, but the human psyche, because that's where we're failing.
Yes.
In the industrialized world today, we're not starving to death. We're not dying of horrible diseases like people used to do 100 years ago. Our problems are that we have idiots running our governments because we don't know who to elect, that our marriages are falling apart, that we can't relate to our children. And that is why I became a human development engineer. I use scientific principles and scientific approaches to help people resolve specific problems in their lives. They would resolve problem A, then they resolve problem B, and this would go on and on and on and on. And while I was doing that, I discovered the septemic phenomena. And at some point today, I can tell you exactly how I discovered it. And that really explains a lot about it.
No, I'm looking forward to that. So I like this, and what you just said about bettering human life, because this is exactly what it's about. You're right. I totally agree with our country's being run. Let's call it by clowns. Let's call it the way it is, right? It's run more because of politics and a lot of greed and a lot of dollar chases in this whole thing. We see it all around. But I like the fact that you've actually written something to improve human lives, because we are failing in this area. And we're not saying that there's something wrong with the humans. We're just saying, let's help humans be better humans so that we can think better,
yes,
act better as well, right? And not just have to go put our cross and vote for this person because they promised us X, Y, and Z. It doesn't work like. We need to start thinking about it and asking the deep questions as well of, whoever we're electing. And that's the knowledge that's missing in the world, especially in this century now as well. It got lost along the way. And to me, Jim, I feel a lot of it has come because of the conditioned backgrounds that many of us have come from as well. So it's about unlearning those bad habits, that negative conditioning, and rewiring yourself, right? And I see that's what Septemics is. It allows you to picture which level you are and, of course, improve yourself. Go up a notch all the time.
That's right.
So what are some of the other benefits? How is Septemics beneficial? If the listeners out there want to know, how is this beneficial? What would you tell them?
Okay. The data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect them to tell you the exact time, place, and location, and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly, so much so that it's considered normal. For example, long ago when I started driving, before GPS units, I was surprised to find how many people did not know precisely where they were geographically, nor how to get there. My request for directions to the person on the other end of the phone was usually requited by vague and often inaccurate instructions, which often did more harm than good. I learned to ask only for an address and look it up on a good map. Now, if this is so for physical locations, it's even more so for conceptual locations because they are abstract. Most people wander through life aimlessly, so much so that, as I said, it's considered normal.
Yeah.
And this book solves that. Whether you're discussing politics, career, romance, finances, health, you name it, most people do not know where they are, where they're going, nor how to get there. If you want to improve your or another's condition, these skills are very useful because each skill is a roadmap for some area of human activity. It enables you to find out precisely where you are, where you're going, and how to get there in some specific context. Wow. If you like, I can read you the names of the 35 skills, and then you would see that I have gotten human phenomena covered in this book.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be interesting to.
Okay. Okay, so these are the individual skills. the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Each one of these scales has the potential to dramatically improve the person's life by finding himself on the appropriate level and finding others as well. For example, let's say a guy has relationship problems, right? Who doesn't have that? He could look at the scale of relationships. Just the fact that there are 7 basic levels of relationship itself is revolutionary. Nobody knows that except the people who read this book. He can find his level, he can find his spouse's level, and it will clarify the relationship greatly, open the way to resolve it, improve it. He can look at the scale of permeation. Permeation is the basic action of a spiritual being. When two people love one another deeply, they are permeating one another. When there is hatred, there is no permeation, right? Somebody like Adolf Hitler, you don't want to permeate him. You want him as far away as possible, okay? So he could look at that and say, okay, how am I permeating? Am I permeating a lot? Am I permeating well? And what about my spouse? Is she? Then he could look at the scale of sexuality. And that on that scale, if you are not compatible, you could be the 2 smartest, nicest people on earth. You will not have a successful romantic relationship. You must be compatible. You don't have to be at the same level, but you have to be at a compatible level. And if you study the scale, that's obvious from the structure of the scale. Then he could look at the scale of allegiance. When relationships deteriorate, it's always because allegiance has deteriorated. So let's say a guy cheats on his girlfriend. That's a deterioration of allegiance, right? He's gone down that scale. So he can find what level he's at. And when he finds it, he will have an epiphany. Okay, so we're talking about a guy who has relationship problems, right? So he could look at the scale of allegiance, because anytime relationships deteriorate, it's always because allegiance has deteriorated, right? Like a guy has a girlfriend and he cheats on her with somebody else. That's a deterioration of allegiance. He has gone down the scale of allegiance to a lower level. He can spot that and he can say, I see. And then he can move up to the higher level. And then he's on the path to getting back in good stead with her. So just off the top of my head, that's 4 scales that a guy can use who doesn't even know this book. You can just say, Joe, come here, look at this. Let me help you figure this out. And you can help him. And I guarantee you, he will get it. Let me give you an example. In the early stages of writing this book, this was in a transcript form when I was researching it and developing it and rewriting it. So about 20 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine about politics and government. And in the middle of our conversation, I said, wait a minute, let me show you something. So I opened the transcript to the scale of government, and I just handed it to him. I didn't say anything. So he took it, and he looked at it. And in about a second, he pointed, and he said, right there, I'm right there. He found his level on that scale without my even suggesting that that's what it was for. He didn't know anything about septemics.
Yeah.
That's how easy this is. People will look at it, you can just go through it and, open the scale of motivation. And we'll say, I see. My father is at this level of motivation. That's a very good motivation, you see? And he will then appreciate him, for example. So if you take that and expand it out a million ways, this is extremely useful in understanding yourself, and understanding others. And once you know this data, it becomes very easy to analyze situations so that you can resolve them. And as a result of that, you can predict what's going to happen. And this takes me to how I discovered this material. I was working assiduously for many decades as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients through many thousands of hours. They all improved as a result of our interactions. As this was going on, I started noticing many decades ago that my clients would improve in ways that were predictable to me. In other words, I would know what result the client was going to get before he got it, even though I did not tell the client anything.
Yeah.
I kept this to myself. I didn't tell anybody about this, but I made notes. Now, by about 1995, I had developed about 32 scales across varying axes between 3 and 7 levels, because I had observed that my clients were literally going up scales. So the guy would be at a certain level, I would observe him being at that level, and then I would know as a result of this session, he was going to go up to the next highest level, and he would, even though he didn't know anything about this. Mm. And this happened thousands and thousands of times. So I had one scale in particular that had 6 levels that I absolutely knew by 1995 was correct, because I had been using it successfully for many decades. In 95, I realized it had a 7th level. And when I inserted that 7th level into the 6th level scale, it manifested mathematically.
Wow.
It went from being a linear phenomenon to a planar phenomenon. Planar as in a plane.
Yeah.
So it was not merely expressible in a scale, it was expressible in a table, because all of this mathematical data showed itself. Now, I took 26 semesters of math, okay? I think in math. I was a serious mathematician, and I understand math. The essence of math is the implications. You start with a formula or an equation, and you develop it. And in so doing, you get useful information that you know is correct because it's derived mathematically. That's how Einstein found E equals mc squared. It was derived mathematically. And when you derive something mathematically, you know it is correct, unless you made a mistake. But then you're not deriving it mathematically, you're deriving it in a non-mathematical fashion, making a mistake. So I knew this was big. I knew this had to be natural phenomena, because anything that has mathematics embedded in it, by definition, is natural phenomena, like the Pythagorean theorem or the 3 laws of motion. They're inherently mathematical. So when this happened, I said, whoa, I wonder how many of these other 32 scales are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way because I was not developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. Mm-hmm. So I inspected the other scales, and because I knew what I was looking for by then, I was able to develop the remaining levels on all of these scales fairly quickly. And as each scale went to 7 levels, it manifested mathematically. Now, each scale was unique, but they all had mathematics embedded in them. And that told me that I had stumbled upon natural law, that this was a new subject that apparently nobody had found before. So that's why in 95, I completed the first transcript, sent it to my colleagues. And when I got a positive response from all these brilliant men, I said, okay, I can go from people by the hundreds to helping people by the millions by giving them this data. And so we spent the next 25 years working on this book to perfect it. Because you have to realize, first I had to discover the data.
Yeah.
That was largely done by 95, although I did find 3 more scales while I was writing the book. Then I had to take this data and use it to construct a workable, usable philosophic system that would reliably help people. That took about 20 years. Because realize I started with the scales that were discovered empirically, just by observation. And then I had to figure out what is this scale measuring? What axis is this? This was not obvious. In some cases, it took me many years to figure this out. What is this thing measuring? I have these 7 levels. I know they're correct, but what is the name of the axis? You see, I had to do that 35 times. Wow. Then you have to realize there are 35 scales, each of which has 7 levels. There's 245 different levels, each of which had to be verified, and even more time consuming than that, expressed in a way that would make sense to people, to the average person. Because my lifetime from childhood was about helping people one way or another. It just comes out of me. I can't help it. And I realized I can really help people by giving them this. So then the next big challenge that was extremely time consuming was expressing this in a way that would make sense to the average person. So for example, as in one of my rewrites, I installed a glossary, not only in front of each of the 35 chapters, but also in front of the introduction. So you know exactly what definition I'm using, not only for the name of the scale, but for the name of each of the levels. You know exactly, each level has a synonym and each scale has a synonymous name. So I'm deepening the understanding by synonyms and by glossaries. So this makes it extremely accessible to anyone who can read English. You see? So I have observed over 27 years since the first version of this book came out, I've been feeding it to people, getting feedback from clients, from associates and so forth, from friends, getting feedback and reverse engineering it from the scales that I had in 1995 into something that would actually work. And I know from my direct observation, it does work. People get it. This is not inscrutable. So for example, let's say you have a father whose kid is having trouble in school.
Yeah.
There is a scale of scholarship. I state in that chapter with specificity how to make a better scholar. How a person is at any one of 7 levels of scholarship. Everybody is at one of those 7 levels. You have to find the level, let the person find his level, and then move him up 1 level. And I tell you how to do that. So the father can say to his kid, let's say he's got a 13-year-old son who's having trouble with algebra. He can say, come here, look at this. Read this glossary. Kid says, okay, now what? Now read this scale. So the kid looks at the scale and he'll say, I can see that I'm either at 3, 4, or 5. This will happen in seconds, maybe 20 seconds. See, he's already thrown out 4 of the 7 levels.
Yeah.
Now you say, okay, read the text of the chapter, because it explains what each of these levels is about. And he'll do that, and then he'll come back and say, I see, I'm at level 5. That's not so great. So then the dad can say, okay, let's move you to level 4. And in so doing, he's made the kid a better scholar, and the kid will do better in school. So the father has helped his son simply by using this book, even though the kid doesn't really know Septemics.
Yeah.
He has lifted him up to be a better student. And take that and expand it out 1,000,000 times. That's what this is about. So parents can use this to help their kids. Counselors can use this to help their clients. Pastors can use it to help their parishioners. Bosses can use this to help their employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So not only does it bring you to an enlightenment about yourself when you find yourself on each of these scales, but it brings you to enlightenment about all the people around you. And I already know from 27 years of observation, anyone who masters this book will necessarily use it on the people around him. It's just like if you had a box of Band-Aids and I cut my finger, you say, oh, Jim, here, take a Band-Aid. That's what you would do. I would say thank you and I would put it on. That's what these scales are like. A guy will see like his brother, having a drinking problem. And he'll say, look, Joe, sit down here. Let me help you with this, right? And they would find the appropriate scale or scales. The guy would read it. He would say, yeah, I see. I'm at this. And then he'll find his level. When he finds his level, the light bulb will go on over his head. He will say, I see what I'm doing. Then you say, okay, let's move you up one level. And he will be able to do that because I have solved the gradient problem. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Nobody can lose 100 pounds.
Yeah.
However, you can lose 1 pound 100 times. Every good teacher, counselor, facilitator, therapist in the world understands gradients. In order to help a person on anything develop, you have to get the right gradient.
Yeah.
I have worked as a personal trainer. If a guy comes to me and says, Jim, train me, I'm not going to just say to him, here's 100 pounds, work out with this. That's bad training. I have to find the gradient. I have to look at him and say, well, this guy looks like he might be able to curl 20 pounds with one arm. I'll say, here, let's see you curl this 20 pounds. How many can you do? And he might say, this is a little hard for me. I can only do about 6. I'd say, okay, let's try 15. And he would do that. And so, yeah, I can do maybe 12 of these. I'd say, good. So let's have you do 12 of these 3 times a day, okay, for the next week. That's proper training. It's the gradient. It could go the other way, too. He could take 20 pounds and say, oh, this is too light for me. I can do this all day. And I'd say, okay, let's try 25. And he'll take that and he'll say, well, this I can do. And I'll say, good. Let's have you do 15 of these every day, 3 times a day for a week on each arm. You see, that's using gradients. This cuts across all human phenomena. Okay? You have to have gradients. This book solves that problem because I give you the gradients.
Yeah.
Across 35 axes, each of these scales give you the gradient. When you find your level, you know that the next thing for you, if you want to improve, is to go up to the next higher level. There's no skipping of levels. That is one of the axioms of this subject. Think of it this way. Let's say you're on the 5th floor and you want to go to the 1st floor. One way or another, you have to go through the 4th, the 3rd, and the 2nd. Whether you take the stairs, the escalator, the elevator, or go out the window and use a rope ladder. Okay? You have to go through. That's what these scales are like. There's no skipping. I'm telling you from 27 years. And you have to realize, I was using these scales before I knew of what Septemics was, and I was observing this. That is what I was doing in my sessions with my clients. I was getting the guy to go up to the next level. If you take a guy at level 4 and you try to move into level 2 or 1, you will fail. It's too steep a gradient. You can't take a guy who weighs 100 pounds and say, oh, okay, go out and run 5 miles a day. That's destructive. Number 1, he's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Number 2, if he did do it, he would have a hard time. He would be sore. He would be angry at you. He would get discouraged. I might say to him, okay, let's have you walk 1 mile a day. Okay? And see how he does with that. At the end of the week, I'd say, how did you do with this? And he'd probably say, well, it was a little hard at the beginning, but I'm doing fine now. I'd say, good. Yeah. Let's try 2 miles a day. And I would see how he did it. That's what these scales are like. So I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled humans for 6,000 years, because even people smart enough to see the problem don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
You see, All parents in the world, when they see their kids having trouble in school, they want to help them. They just don't know how to do it.
True.
So when they take this scale of scholarship, this opens the way for them to help the kid with specificity. You just have to understand it. And you have to realize this is not hard to comprehend because it's natural law. See, like the Pythagorean theorem, almost anyone who's been to high school understands the Pythagorean theorem because it's taught in geometry. Although many people learn it earlier than, it's axiomatically true. It was true before humans existed, and it will be true after Earth no longer is here. It's embedded in the fabric of the universe. So it's very easy to grasp, just like the periodic table. Before Dmitri Mendeleev invented the periodic table, there was chemistry, but it was chaotic. He took all of the elements that were known, put them on one piece of paper in the correct arrangement horizontally and vertically. And he revolutionized physical science because anyone who looks at the periodic table and understands it, it's not that hard to understand, will say, okay, this makes sense. These are the metals. These are the inerts. You see, these go together in this family. These go together. And then chemistry makes sense to you. So ever since then, everybody in natural science has been simply, as we discover new elements, just inserting them into this scale, into this table. Now, you have to realize, each of these 35 scales is expressed as a table or spreadsheet in the book.
Okay.
It's like rectangular. So each of them is like a periodic table for the corresponding subject.
Wow.
So I read to you the names of the 35 scales. So for example, there's a scale of thought, okay? When you look at the scale of thought, you see a table. It's a periodic table of thought. It has dimension to it. It's not just a line, because all of the mathematical underpinnings manifest themselves in a way that makes it very easy for you to look and say, I see, this makes sense. And so you will be able to see why this level of thought is above this level of thought, and that level of thought is above the lower level of thought. It's not counterintuitive. It's very intuitive. And so people grasp this quickly, easily, assuming you know how to read English and you study the book. So what I tell everyone, including all my clients and my friends and readers, this is a textbook on a new subject, okay? This subject did not exist before 1995. So I tell them, study it the way you would study a chemistry text, a physics text, a math text, an economics text. Start with the first line of the first page and go through carefully, read all the definitions, don't skip anything, and read the whole book. And then when you're done, go back to the beginning, read it again. And when you come to each scale, find your level on every scale. And when you do that, you will have an epiphany every time. You will say, I see. That's my basic purpose. No wonder X, Y, Z. And you will look at other people and you will understand people. So, for example, I've studied Thomas Jefferson. I know his basic purpose. That makes it very easy for me to understand him, what he was trying to do, why he was in such a conflict with Hamilton, who was in the same cabinet with him. They were at different levels on this scale. And it was like abrasive between them. So when you see yourself, like, for example, you find your basic purpose, you throw out the other seven. You say, they're not for me. I'm not about that. I'm about this thing. And then it's very easy to go through life because you know what you're about. And most people don't know that.
Yeah.
Now, many people are not even looking for that. which is unfortunate. But those of us who are looking are sort of stumbling around. This book ends the stumbling because it tells you these are the 7 choices. And when you narrow it down to only 7 choices, it's not hard to get. Because you can look at it and say, oh, that's not my level. You throw it out, see? And you look at another, oh, that's not my level. And you throw it out. And then usually in a matter of seconds, you get it into a bracket. We'll say, well, I'm either at level 3 or level 4. I'm not sure. Then you study the text, the whole chapter, and it tells you with specificity what these levels are about, how they manifest, what persons of history occupy these levels. And as you do that, you'll find yourself and say, I'm at level 3. That explains what I'm about. And it works the other way too. Like I have a client, for example, very rich person, smart, successful, okay, at the top of his profession. I know this person's basic purpose just from observing him. And because of that, I know what he's about. So nothing he does surprises me. See, I know what he's trying to do, and I'm not going to do anything to try to disrupt that. Because when you go against the basic purpose, that person is going to fight you. Just like Jefferson fought Hamilton. They were very different. Hamilton was at level 2 on the scale of basic purposes. Jefferson was at level 3. Okay? They were both brilliant men. They were very different. And they did not get along. So this happens all the time, and it helps you to understand and accept the person for what it is. So my whole view of life is that this predates Septemics. You find what's good in the person and focus on that. For example, when I was in prep school, I had a math teacher for 2 years, okay, junior and senior year. This guy was not a nice person. He was certainly a fascist. He was probably a Nazi. He was definitely anti-Semitic. To me, these are terrible things. He was not a nice person. I spent 2 years with this man, but he was a brilliant math teacher. Brilliant. He knew how to teach math. Every single class, he came in with one piece of paper and taught from that piece of paper. He never even looked in the book. He just said, okay, this is how you do trigonometry. And I said, yes, day after day after day. Okay. And that made me not merely a kid who was studying math, it made me a mathematician. So I had respect for this man, even though I didn't agree with him, even though I didn't particularly like him. You see, that is the way to deal with people. Everybody has flaws. Everybody. So like Thomas Jefferson, he was brilliant. He was a genius, but he had some serious personality flaws. He was a very petulant person. Okay? So you have to take the person in the context of who he is. And this book enables you to find out across 35 axes who the person is, what this person is about. And even more importantly, find out for yourself, who are you? And as you find, each time you do this for yourself or another person, you have a realization. And this is very easy. As I told you, if you're reading this book, you'll be reading and say, you'll find, that's my brother-in-law. That's how he is. He's right at this level. This describes him perfectly. You see, without even attempting to do that. When you started reading it, you weren't even thinking about your brother-in-law. But it's so clear that when you read it, you'll say, I get it. That's what he's about. No wonder he does bop-biddy-bop-biddy-bop. So because of this, I find it very easy to understand people, very easy to get along with people, very easy to have beneficial interrelationships with people because I understand them. I'm not puzzled as to why they do what they do. For example, I know a friend, I have somebody who has 3 college degrees, okay? I know this person's basic purpose. This person doesn't know anything about Septemics, but I know the person's basic purpose because people tell you. It comes right out of their mouths. if you listen and you know the material. So because I know this person's basic level, I have a certain expectation about this person. I'm not going to expect this person to function at a lower level or a higher level. In other words, I allow the person to be who the person is, deal with the person at that level, and by knowing that, we have a very positive relationship. You see?
That's amazing.
If Jefferson understood this book and knew Hamilton's level and knew his own level, they would not have been at one another's throats as they were for decades. Okay? Now, I'm not particularly blaming Jefferson. Hamilton was a difficult person to get along with. He managed to alienate all of the founding fathers, all of them. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison. He alienated all of them. And one of the founding fathers killed him. That's how far it went. Okay? So I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. Both of these men had a significant impact on founding this nation. And Washington, to his credit, was smart enough to see that Jefferson was the perfect Secretary of State and Hamilton was the perfect Secretary of the Treasury. Jefferson would have been a terrible Secretary of the Treasury. He was never able to manage his own affairs. He was in debt his whole life, even though he was a very wealthy man. He owned thousands of acres of land and many slaves. Now, of course, in his day, everybody he knew in his circle had slaves. That was normal. That had been going on for thousands of years. So, although he came to realize that it was a bad thing, that's the way things were in those days.
Yeah.
So now Hamilton never owned a slave in his life. Okay, very different type of a person. Same thing with John Adams. John Adams never owned a slave. He could have. He had money. He was against it from day one. He was against it, and he refused to do it. Although there was nothing stopping him. Now, Jefferson was somebody who didn't like conflict. He did not like to argue, okay? He would get his feelings hurt. That's not how Hamilton was. Hamilton was in your face. He was there saying, we have to do this. This is the right thing, okay? And he made America financially solvent from day one when the country was in terrible debt. Jefferson could never have done that. Not the right person, you see? So Washington, in his wisdom, he was not an intellectual. He was not as smart as either of these men, but he was wise. And he saw Henry Knox is the perfect person to be Secretary of War. And he made him Secretary of War. Henry Knox could never have done what Jefferson did as Secretary of State. He could never have done what Hamilton did as Secretary of the Treasury. But he was perfect for Secretary of War. So Washington, in his own crude way, this was not a well-educated man, was smart enough because he understood people, okay? And he had the kind of wisdom you get from street smarts, what we call street smarts today. Being out on the frontier, fighting Indians, fighting the French, okay? Being out as a military leader, winning and losing both. And he was smart enough to see what was going on, okay? And he put together this fantastic cabinet that's why so many people say he was the best president. It's either him or Lincoln in terms of scholarship. If you study historians, they all say it was either Lincoln or Washington. And that's what Washington did. That was so great. I mean, he set up the country by seeing what these disparate persons were good at and putting them in those jobs. Washington had a terrible time for years trying to keep Jefferson and Hamilton from being at one another's throats, trying to keep them both in the cabinet. Eventually, Jefferson said, I'm out of here. And he resigned. So he didn't like conflict.
Yeah.
So this book undercuts all of this because it helps you to understand who's good at what.
And so many good golden nuggets from this, Jim, as well. And if you look at the world, the way we are at the moment as well, everyone's at some loggerheads with each other, right? Especially when it's politicians and stuff. If you look at even race, religion, sex, culture, all of this, people are fighting each other because they don't understand each other, and they don't want to make the time to understand the other person and understand the other person's religion, for example, or culture. Because once we start doing that, we become more tolerant as humans, and we're able to work better with them as well. So I like that you put something together like this, because the world really does need it. The other thing I observed is a lot of what you have in your book, it has to start from within. It has to start from you before you can start understanding who your friends are, your family members, your business colleagues, etc. as well. So good starting point, because many of us need to realize who we are, what's our purpose, etc., before we can even pass on that. And that goes with self-love as well, right? Because you have covered compassion in your book as well, where you're basically saying that you should matter more than ever. And once you matter, whoever you is your partner or friends or colleagues, etc., they start to matter as well. So really, really valuable information. And I see Septemics basically applies to everyone then, right? Everyone should be understanding
Absolutely.
what it's really about, especially now as
Yes.
well. So, wow. Thank you so much.
This book,
Yes. So thank you so
yeah,
much.
let me just say, on the heels of what you just said, this book is for anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or his life.
Wow.
That's what it's for.
So
And I wrote it in a way that once you have the book, and it exists in hardbound, softbound, and ebook. Of course, the ebook is inexpensive. That's all you need.
Yeah.
I wrote it that way. You don't need to join a club. You don't need to spend money. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to take classes. You don't need to join a religion. It's just you and the book. Okay? The only thing you might need is a dictionary. That's true for any book.
True. Yeah. True.
So I devoted the next 25 years of my life to creating this book to make it foolproof, so that any person who wants to improve himself, if he can read English, you can get this book and do it.
Wow.
And of course, you have to apply yourself, but if you do, you will get a benefit.
Yeah. No, so for the listeners out there, how do they get a copy of the book, Jim? How do they reach out and get it?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say I advise, or I invite all of your guests to my website, septemics.com. That's SEPTEMICS, where you can see what many readers have said, what many journalists have written, what the reviews are, and you can read sections of the book itself.
Oh, wow.
And it also tells you where you can get the book, but it's very easy to find. I mean, this book is available wherever books are sold. If you just put the word Septemics in the search engine, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people who are selling the book, which includes Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, the publisher. It's easy to find.
Okay.
And it's easy to buy. Yeah. And then you just have to study it like a textbook and use it.
Okay.
And my motivation here is to help people. I'm never even going to know the people who benefit from this book. I mean, right now, there's some guy in Dubuque, Iowa, reading this book and saying, now I see what's going on with me and my wife, and straightening out his relationship. I'm never even going to know that guy. But that's my purpose, is to help people.
I like that.
And the book does help people.
Wow, that is so human and so noble. My purpose is to help people, because that's exactly what we need to do as well. So congratulations on the book. Congratulations on putting this information together as well, Jim. What would be that one pointer that you can share for the listeners out there? What's that one thing they really need to do?
Well, I want to say that each of these scales dispels confusion by orienting the person in his situation. Confusion is the result of disorientation. Consequently, when a person knows where he stands, he can think much more clearly about that area. These scales facilitate the ascertainment of your present location or condition, your immediate objective, and the pathway to achieve your goal in any given context.
Wow.
So no matter where you are, no where you're trying to go, these skills can help you arrive more swiftly and less painfully. And that's why I created it, and I hope it helps people.
Wow. And the person has to know where they are at this current moment, right? Because you need to know where you are and where you want to go and what you need to do in between to get to your destination as well, right?
Yes.
Where the book
And
plays
it's all
such a major role.
It's all very clearly explained in the book. I went through a lot of trouble to make this accessible to people.
Wow, thank you.
You know, if as long as you can read English and you want to improve yourself, there are people who are not interested in self-improvement. This book is obviously not for them. But for people who are interested in self-improvement and interested in helping the people around them, this book will help you. So that's why I wrote it. And that's why I'm doing these interviews, to get people to find out that it exists and to help them to access it. Because don't rely on the government or the church or some university or some corporation to save you. It's not going to happen. They all have access to grind. They all have their own agenda. They all have corrupt people within them. They're all making a living. Help yourself. And if you help yourself, you make your life better, and then it progressively gets easier and easier and easier as you go. Then the more you use this book, the easier it becomes to use it further.
Absolutely.
Because you're enlightening yourself.
And that's it. It's about enlightening yourself as well. And I like what Jim mentioned as well. Nobody's going to help you if you can't help yourself. And that's a fact of life. So if you want to grow as a person and become the best version of yourself, get a book like Septemics and understand where you are and allow yourself to grow as well. So Jim, I want to thank you for your time. I really thank you for coming on the show today. I mean, I did not know much about Septemics until chatting to you as well. And I really do like what I'm hearing. For the readers out there or the listeners out there, we will post Jim's details on the description here as well. So be sure to look out for that. This will be on YouTube. It'll be on my podcast stations as well. So on YouTube, I invite you to go in and put in some questions. If you want Jim to answer certain questions that you're confused about, just type in the comment there as well and you'll get it. And he would be able to answer those questions for you as well. And if you like this content, please like it, share it with as many people as possible. There's an alarm bell over there. Just click on subscribe so that you get notified whenever we release an episode as well. So Jim, thank you once again for inspiring us and the audience as well. We do appreciate you, and best of wishes with the book. It's such an amazing book, taking you such a long time to write it. And I believe the whole world should be knowing about this book as well. I'm definitely going to be checking out the e-copy of the book as well. Is there going to be an audio version as well at some point, or is it not really meant for audio?
There will never be an audio version, because you have to look at the 35 tables. It's a visual construct, just like the periodic table of elements. You cannot express the periodic table by voice. You have to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay? When you look at these tables, they jump out at you. The data makes itself clear by looking at it. I also want to say, I'm not telling you that you should tell people your level. Find your level. You can keep that to yourself. You may not want to reveal your level. In fact, I don't think you should. It's to help you understand yourself. And when you find other people, don't tell them their level. Get them to find it themselves. It's not about judgment. It's not about telling people what to do. It's about helping people to enlighten themselves, enlightening yourself and enlightening the people around you. That's what it's about. It's about cognition.
Finding the answers within. I like that, really. And that's so important as well. So, thanks so much. Really, really valuable information. I really believe the world needs to see this book and understand it. And I like the part that you mentioned, it's not audio as well, because a lot of us are visual people. And it's so much more easier to understand when you look at pictures. For me, I know that works perfectly well as for me. So thank you once again. And thanks everyone for listening to Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan. This is Nolan Pillay, your host for today. Thank you, Jim, once again. We really do appreciate your time, and we look forward to learning more about you in the future as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Nolan.